Ed's not joining us remotely.
He was gonna try.
Who's that?
He's in Mexico. He was gonna try. He's gonna try.
Yeah, he didn't tell me. We were emailing when I began.
Good evening. I'd like to call to order the monthly meeting of the McMinnville Water and Light Commission. Today is November 21st, 2023. Start the meeting at 5:37 p.m. I would ask our clerk, Trina McManus, to do a roll call.
Yes, Mayor Dropkin,
Here.
Commissioner Tankersley,
Here.
Commissioner Gormley is excused, Commissioner Christensen,
Here.
Commissioner Tate.
Here. Thank you. We have a short consent agenda. Does any commissioner wish to have anything removed from the consent agenda and heard in its regular place? Not hearing any removals, I would entertain a motion to pass the consent agenda as it's presented in our packet. So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Commissioner Tate and a second from Chair Tankersley. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed say nay. And the motion passes unanimously. Have commissioners had an opportunity to review accounts payable and purchasing reports? And are there any questions?
No questions.
Excellent. And then we will go to our forestry report, and I would welcome Mr. Brent Keller, who I believe is joining us remotely today, to give our report.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, the 187 road sale is wrapping up. That should be completely done here in the next week or so. Looks like we're going to hit the targets pretty well right on as far as volume and value go. Looks like we'll come out a little over once the final loads are in, and then they'll just have flash piling and some road maintenance to do to button up everything on the ground there as far as the logging goes. Of course, 303 road is entirely complete there, and then what's left is projects that are associated with both sales, which is mostly unit slashing and road work, and so all that will be done by the end of the year. And then next month I'll present a review of this year's program, harvest recommendations for 2024, and MBG's proposed 2024 budget. Any questions?
Nope. All right, thank you very much. Next, we'll go to
All right,
staff.
thanks a lot.
Thank you. Staff reports, and hand this over to our general counsel, Mr. Sam Justice, to talk about public meeting laws.
So good evening. So in this last legislative session, the legislature passed House Bill 2805. And what this House bill essentially did in part was codify an earlier opinion out of Wayne County, out of the Court of Appeals. It was actually later overturned at the Supreme Court, but that basically talked about public meetings, and specifically talked about executive sessions and the concepts of serial meetings, electronic meetings. In that case, involved allegations that officials with Wayne County conducted a meeting by sort of by email in sort of serial succession. So they didn't meet together, but they met, or the court found that they actually met by having a series of interconnected emails or a sort of discussion electronically, where they never had an actual quorum, but the group sort of met, serially by communicating with each other outside of a public meeting. And Wayne County Court found that was a violation of public meeting laws and validated the decision. That later went to the Court of Appeals, where it was affirmed, but then it was overturned at the Supreme Court on other grounds. So the case kind of went away, but the issue remained. And since 2016, we've been sort of living under that Court of Appeals opinion that said, serial meetings like that are not okay. And so the legislature in this last session kind of took took that to heart and codified that. As you can see in my memo, and as you can see also by the House bill that's in the packet, there are also changes there that provide for sort of grievance procedure, for lack of a better word, for the public. So there's now a kind of a administrative cause of action to the ethics board to allow for complaints about violations of public meeting laws. Anyway, I was just put in the packet. It's informational. You can also see there's going to be training in the future for public officials. So you expect to see that in the next, I would think in the next year or sometime.
Okay. Any questions?
Real quickly, Sam. So if I want to ask John about something, and then he talks to two other commissioners about that, I mean, as long as it doesn't come back to me. Is that
Well,
okay.
Probably the best thing or the concept is that discussions that relate to things that are being discussed or being decided in the public meeting, those discussions should be, as they're amongst you, should occur in the open forum.
No,
So,
but
right,
I want information from staff.
right. You can get information from staff.
Okay, and
Right.
even if other commissioners would, I'm not gonna, I wouldn't have organized this, but
Right,
if other commissioners call and get information from staff too, that's all right.
that's okay.
Okay, great.
Right,
Thank
that's
you.
okay. Sorry, maybe I was reading something into your question that wasn't there.
No,
Right.
Other additional questions?
The quorum for this group is 3.
3, that's correct.
Thank you.
Additional questions?
No.
All right. Thank you very much. And now Mr. Dunmeyer, our finance director, has a report on the commission regarding Marsh Lane and the feedback we've gotten from county city insurance.
Yeah, thank you,
County.
Madam Mayor. Yeah, as indicated in my staff report, several safety and security concerns have come up as a result of ongoing activity on Marsh Lane. And so as a part of considering potential actions that we might take to improve safety and security, we did reach out to City County Insurance. They have a risk management group. And so Mr. Dan Brown and Margaret Ryan, they both are CS risk management consultants. They came on site and prepared, or they did assessments, and then they prepared a consultation and are going to be here this evening to present that to the commission in executive session. Ms. Ryan is here in attendance with us, and Mr. Brown will join us on Zoom at that time.
Thank you. Any questions? Right.
Okay. Thanks.
Might as well stay there.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, because next we are moving into our financial report and our annual audit. Mr. Dunmeyer,
Thank you.
hand that over to you again.
Yeah, so we just completed the process of the audit and drafting the financial statements, and included in the packet this evening is the draft of the final draft of the financial statements at this point. A couple of weeks ago, the audit committee met and looked over the draft at that time, and went through that together, made a few minor grammar corrections, some edits to note 1 around additional description in the section in that note on renewable energy credits, RECs, and then also there's a section in there on due to the city of McMinnville, just again some minor wordsmithing to that. Made some a correction to the cash on hand, which was in note 2 that related to the city service charge, the amount that we had collected and that was payable to the city at June 30th. So these are adjustments, things that kind of changed this year that we needed to make some edits to in the notes to capture that. since we began collecting the city service charge this year. This year meaning fiscal year 22-23. And then also some minor edits again to the wording in note 5 on the renewable energy credits, and then finally some verbiage edits to note 12, which is centered around water sales to Carleton. So, and there's, after these edits were made, there's an additional question that came up around Carleton and the presentation of the water revenue that we received from Carleton in the financial statements themselves, the way that looks on page 17 specifically. And so what I'll do is, before I wanted to share that with the commission this evening, but do that after the auditors present their the results of their audit process. They need to do that, and then we could talk about this kind of at the tail end as a potential maybe change in how either the presentation looks in the face of the financial statements, or maybe how we look at that note that describes the water sales to Lafayette and Carleton. So in my staff report, I described the results of the audit process. We had a few adjustments that were all related to timber revenues and correcting how we had previously recorded that in our general ledger. We did that based on when we received those payments. In each instance, we didn't really have great documentation that came with the payment. And so we deciphered what we thought was correct and recorded it the way that we thought. In digging into that deeper, we were able to get the logs weighing reports, basically showing when those logs were scaled, which is when they become revenue. And so in the course of doing that, that changed the fiscal year that we would record that revenue. And so we made those changes on our books, and then that got reflected in our financials as well. So the auditor will present that information to us. Both Keith Simovic, he is our partner at Moss Adams that handles our engagement, and then also Sam Garcia Castro, he was the senior auditor for our job, and they both did a wonderful job for us, and I'm grateful for them. And they're going to present, I think, at this time.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, hopefully you can all hear me okay.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Fantastic. If we've got technology working right off the bat, then I think this will go well. So, well, thank you for having us here. Appreciate all the comments, Mark. At the end there, I think you did a few of the things that we were going to present on up front, which is fantastic. So we're happy to go through any questions any of you might have as well. As Mark said, we did get a chance to meet with the audit committee a couple of weeks back and go through similar information. This is more a condensed version of that, but had a good meeting with the audit committee and go through any questions both on the financial statements themselves and any edits there that were noted, or any questions that they had, as well as the overall results of our audit process and what we came across during the course of our audit and what our final deliverables say. So we'll go through a more abbreviated version of that today. But again, we're happy to answer any questions that you have as we go along. Lots of good information here overall. Yes, there's some items in terms of the timber revenue that were adjusted, but at the end of the day, we're able to work through that with staff at MW&L Water and Light, and have a good overall result for all of our deliverables that we'll go through. So if I can, I'm going to try and share my screen and go through our presentation here. So it looks like I'll be able to do that. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So moving real briefly, just this is kind of the core of our team. Of course, there's two of us here today, but there's many more folks involved, a couple more on the screen here, but then the other staff that were involved and working on site face-to-face with your staff as well, which is definitely appreciated. Not all of our clients, now that we've kind of been out this COVID environment for a little while now. Not all of our clients are having us back in person, but McMinnville Water and Light and the staff there have been gracious enough to host us in person, have that face-to-face communication, which we were so used to before the pandemic. We could never dream of kind of doing all of this remotely. So we really appreciate that. I think it's really beneficial to this overall process and the efficiency of it as well. So really appreciate that. In addition to myself, we have Julie Desimone, who's our this year served as our concurring reviewer and partner and stepped into that role. She's not really involved in any other capacity. Yes, she used to be in kind of the role that I serve now as the engagement reviewer, where I'm really responsible for our final reports and deliverables. But Julie leads our firm's energy practice, our power and utilities national practice, and has a lot of experience in this area, has a lot of experience with McMinnville Water and Light, but still being able to come in now as kind of that higher level reviewer on certain key documents and acting as a quality control review, making sure that did we follow through on all the things that we said we were going to do in our planning process? Did we follow all of our professional standards? Do the final deliverables include all the items that we identified during the audit? And again, do they follow all the standards that we have to make sure we're in compliance with? So very key role there. Happy to have Julie and someone very experienced in the industry, and that leads our practice for the firm. Laurel Brasheko is a senior manager. She would normally be here, but she's actually now out of the country, kind of helping do some training over in our brand new office that we just started up in India, actually. So we're actually starting up our own office over there as well, and she's helping with some of the training efforts over there. So this is the second year in a row around this time of year that she's been gone. But before she left, she did help out with a lot of the initial review that I worked through, making sure that all of our work papers that we're going through, that our testing is appropriate, that we are pulling the right sample sizes and identifying errors as if there are any as we go along. So very important role there. Happy to have Laurel on the team again this year. And then, of course, I'm going to pass it over to Sam. Do you want to kind of just do a quick introduction, Sam, and kind of explain your role in the engagement as well?
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Keith. So my name's Sam. This is my third year on the engagement, first year stepping in as the in-charge. So I wanted to say thank you to Mark and the rest of the team for helping out. And I just kind of help maintain communication between the Moss Adams team and the McMinnville team.
Perfect. Thank you, Sam. All right. Quick recap of what you can expect to receive out of this process when you go through an independent financial statement audit each and every year. And you hire an independent auditor to do this work. These are the things that you can expect to receive out of it. Boxes 1 and 2 there are very much interrelated. There's really only one deliverable between those, but kind of two different things that we do to kind of get to that end deliverable, which is the independent auditor's report on the fairness and accuracy of the financial statements of McMinnville Water and Light. Both the light system and the water system, those are kind of shown separately in your financial statements, and we actually set a separate materiality audit each of those systems. Individually, we set separate materiality so that there's not really one system that kind of gets scoped out or certain transactions that get scoped out. Each one is scaled as if it was its own audit, which I think is a key piece there. That testing that we do involves all of the vouching back to invoices and contracts and agreements, all kinds of supporting documentation, whether it's confirmations that we send to your third-party depositories. If you had debt outstanding, typically we're confirming that with a third party, but you don't. But reaching out to your third-party depositories, that's a piece of the confirmation process that we go through, making sure what they have reported on their side is consistent with what McMinnville Water and Light and staff have recorded in its general ledger as well. So all of that detailed testing that we're doing, making sure that everything that's reflected in your financial statements and your financial report that you have before you is in line with the not only the governmental accounting standards, but just recorded at the correct amount, correct period, classified appropriately, has an appropriate business purpose, and has gone through your internal control process, right? That has the appropriate reviews and reconciliations and those types of things in place. So that at the end of the day, we can say, hey, we've got enough evidence that we believe these financial statements are free of material misstatement. And that's exactly what our report says. Box 2, as I mentioned, is related to that audit report, but that is the technical review of the financial statement as in itself. So there's a very specific kind of format and presentation and disclosures that have to go along with your financial statements. And that's all set out by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, right? That they set the guidance for how this should look and feel. So we have to do that technical review to kind of make sure you're in line with all of that as well. Box 3 is unique to the state of Oregon. It's an additional report that we issue that's typically going to be attached to the back of the financial statements. And there's some additional compliance requirements that they have us go through just to make sure that you're following state statutes in certain key areas they want us to look at. The one for McMinnville Water and Light that we spend the most time on is going to be the procurement section, making sure you're following all the guidelines for public procurements, competitive bidding, things of that nature. But we're also looking at other areas as well, what types of investments you're getting into, what types of, or what areas you're parking, where are you parking your deposit, depositing your funds in approved depositories from the state treasurers is really the guidelines there. So there's a number of different areas that we're looking at and reporting out on just to make sure that you're in line with the state statutes. And if we note any instances of non-compliance, that's where we note them. Box 4 is our communication to those charged with governance. In addition to this presentation, we have a separate letter that we issue just to give you a little more information as to how the audit went. In addition to just the audit reports, did you get a clean report or not? This lets you know, well, did you run into issues along the way? Did you get everything that you asked for? Did you have any errors or adjustments that were identified and reflected in the final financial statement that has your audit report attached to it? Those are the types of things that are covered in that letter, and we're going to talk through those a little bit more. Overall, very good news here. These are our final key things that you want to see with each of our audit deliverables. So our overall audit opinion on the financial statements, we do have a clean, unmodified audit opinion, exactly what you're looking for, exactly what any third party would want to see that wants to get a hand on your financial statements. They want to know, did you have an audit? Is it done timely? Is it done by an independent CPA firm? And did you get a clean opinion overall? Very, very key piece there to give you your financial statements a little more weight in terms of the numbers that are presented within there. In your Oregon minimum standards report, that additional compliance report that we have to go through, we didn't have any findings in terms of those key areas that we're looking at. Again, procurement, some of the sampling that we're doing there, and investments and depositories, didn't have any findings to note within that report. So very good news there. And in terms of our communication to those charged with governance, that additional letter that I mentioned, we didn't have any what we would call material weaknesses. There's other items we're going to note here in the next few slides, but that's when we always want to call out right at the front, because that's where we would note those types of things. And that's kind of the highest level of severity in terms of our audit speak, a material weakness that we could note. Could kind of give you a red flag warning of, hey, there could be something that could go wrong, not necessarily that it has, but something that could go wrong where your processes, your checks and balances in place today wouldn't catch that, and it could be significant. That's what a material weakness would kind of alert you to. We didn't have anything along those lines, which is very good news there. As we went through and we looked at your processes and your internal controls in this year. So very good news there. All right, in terms of that communication to those charged with governance, we've got bullet points on here that kind of align with the different paragraphs that we have within that letter. A lot of these items, are kind of prescribed by our professional standards. We have to kind of note each one of these things and let you know, hey, did we come across anything that was concerning or not? So I'm not going to go through each one of these in depth here because a lot of this was fairly boilerplate language that we didn't have to modify anything because we didn't encounter issues or things of that nature, which is good news. But I'm going to highlight a few of these that I think are important. One being significant accounting policies. This is one of the first footnotes that you'll see right behind your basic financial statements. And one of the key areas with financial accounting and reporting is comparability from one year to the next. You want to understand as a reader, hey, did the organization change how they're accounting for anything from one year to the next that'll impact comparability? I want to know that things are fairly consistent from year to year, unless there's a good reason for the change. And a lot of times that's only because there's a new accounting standard that's out there that's requiring that change, right? So the big new one this year was GASB statement number 96. You don't have to remember the number there, but what this new standard is asking every governmental organization that has to follow GASB what they're asking everyone to do is to evaluate all your IT arrangements, all your software contracts that you have, where potentially you are doing a subscription-based kind of payment arrangement for software that you don't own. So maybe you have an agreement out there where it's 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, where you're able to kind of license or use that software for a period of time in exchange for payment. That's what they're talking about with this standard. And they've really changed the accounting for that, where if you have one of those, day one of those arrangements, you've got an asset and a liability on the books. Instead of prior to that standard coming out, you would just expense those payments as you're making them. So a lot different than in the past. Just wanted to let you know that this is a new standard that was adopted by your team, by your staff. They did a lot of work to evaluate the impact and all their different IT agreements that are out there. But at the end of the day, there wasn't a real material impact from this. So you're not going to see a lot of changes from it, but you will see a paragraph in the significant accounting policy footnote that says that your team kind of knows that this is out there, adopted in the current year, and that there was no impact. In terms of audit adjustments, this is kind of the letter where we would note, hey, were there any material items that we identified that had to be updated in your financial statements? Because as we were going through our testing, we identified something where, again, it's maybe not following the GASB rules, maybe it wasn't recorded in the correct period or the correct amount when we went back and looked at the substantive evidence behind that transaction. So we're going to talk through what we identified there. I know Mark kind of brought up some of that already with the timber revenues, but you'll see the dollar amounts and what we're talking about there a little more in depth. When we talk about no disagreements with management or no difficulties in performing the audit, I think this is important, even though it seems pretty straightforward, but I think it's important to note that we got all the documentation that we asked for and got responses to all the questions that we had, typically in a very timely manner too. I think that's important as kind of the governing body of any organization, just to see, hey, do you feel like management was putting any limitations on the scope of your audit procedures? That's a really key piece, and that could keep us from giving a clean audit opinion overall, or from completing the audit, really, if we were encountering those types of situations. But that's not the case. Just as we've come to expect over the years, we were able to get all the information that we asked for and got responses to all the questions we had. In terms of other audit observations and recommendations, we also have another slide on those, and they are related directly to the audit adjustments that we identified during this process. In terms of that adjustment that kind of Mark brought up, overall, you'll see an impact primarily to the prior year, where you've got an increase in your accounts receivable and your timber revenues for the June 30th, 2022 year end, kind of moving those things out of where they were originally recorded in the current fiscal year that we just audited for the year ended June 30th, 2023. So it's moving things out of the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2023, moving those revenues to June 30th, 2022, because as we saw additional documentation, not just the payment, we were saying, hey, the dates of actual kind of logging that occurred related to the checks that were received in July of 2022, that logging actually happened in June of 2022. So it should be moved to that period. So that is what occurred. It's not that the dollar amount or the transaction wasn't recorded at all. It wasn't that there was an issue with the cash received or anything. It was just the period in which it was recorded. And it was based on kind of the information that was available at the time that it needed to be recorded. So just pushing it from one period to a different one is all that happened there. Other than that, the other item that we noted was other timber revenues that were kind of moved into the year ended June 30th, 2023 from now, as we're seeing transactions in July of 2023 as well, that would have been going in the next fiscal year. Now they're being moved into this fiscal year as we were finding similar issues there. So really just kind of that cutoff issue with timing of what period things were recorded in. Any questions on that thus far?
No.
Okay. Last piece there, as we noted, whenever we have an audit adjustment that we identify, we always have to go back and say, hey, what could be changed going forward so that you don't run into this in the future, right? Obviously, the issue here was really just the information that was received, the lack of that information or the timing of receiving that information. So if there's a way to continue to kind of work with those logging companies to figure out, hey, can we get this documentation or the proper documentation that we need to understand when did logging actually occur? Because that's what, under the accounting rules, that's what drives when you have to recognize that revenue and record it in your general ledger. And so to kind of avoid this in the future, having those conversations, seeing if that information can be received more timely in the future so that you have what you need, your staff have what you need to be able to record that in the correct period.
Hey, Keith. Can you hear me,
Yeah,
Keith?
I
Hey,
can.
I have a bad habit of talking too quiet. One thing I was going to mention, so we actually did have all of that documentation. The problem was finance, accounting, we did not connect that. Trina's the one that pulls that, and we didn't connect that she had that. And so in the future, our procedure will be to go to her. And if she doesn't have it for some reason, hasn't received it yet, then we'll wait to record it. But anyway, so I think what the issue was less about Water and Light having received that information. It was that, procedurally, we weren't connecting to that before we did the receiving. So anyway, so yeah, we'll do that going forward.
Perfect. Yeah. And if there's some reason you don't have the information or can't get it, I mean, another option is always, is that something that, we can kind of set some kind of threshold or something. And once you get the actuals in, if you need to kind of move it to a different period, you can, or if you need to estimate something, that's a possibility as well. So there's a number of ways to kind of work around this and make sure it's not something that you have to worry about in the future. And it's really just that tail end of the one fiscal year and the start of a next, right? That June to July timeframe is what can really kind of cause issues there. So that's the one to kind of focus in on. All right. Well, other than that, just a big thank you again to all the staff involved in this process. Yes, finance does a big heavy lift on this, but a number of different departments are involved and pull documentation for us, spend time with us, go through detailed walkthroughs with us as we're walking through a certain process or how something's transacted and recorded in the system. So appreciate all the time and efforts that everyone puts into this process, and again for hosting us on site. So thank you for that. Other than that, I'm going to stop there, and if there's any questions, happy to answer those.
Thank you. Any questions?
Do we want to talk about that issue now?
Yeah. So Trina, if you can bring up the PDF I sent you, what I did to help describe this presentation question, page 17 will be the first thing that we'll see when she's able to bring that up for us.
Or maybe I could just give some background and explain.
Sure.
My concern was that I think we need to track what our wholesale water is, because we haven't made a formal decision, but we are revenue from that. But we have talked about, anyway, using those funds to help pay for the expanded system from the Willamette. And I think that commissioners ought to be able to look at the financials and tell where, how much that was. And then this year, and also apparently last year, the Carlton water the revenues got lumped with everything else that was charged basically at the same rate, which would be the out of town, and the out of town and in town are lumped in the residential. So even though I think we've all thought of Carlton as wholesale water this last couple of years, it shows up in the residential on that chart there, and
it actually shows up as general service.
There's a chart too that goes back 5 years, and it shows up that way too. And so I think we need to have that. I think moving forward, we ought to show not only what, and I don't know if you can change, this is the chart, the bar graph on page 9 that shows actually the historical going back to 2018. And I'd like to, I think the commission ought to be able to see that on page 9. and in the future, so I don't know if you can change this year in a way that doesn't mess you up in giving the audit to the city. It won't take too long, but I'd sure like to see that in the future, and I'd like to see, I think you told me you can change the notes anyway. I'd like to have the footnote changed to explain what it is, and just so somebody could look there, but I'm concerned that somebody trying to figure this out, looking at the financials, wouldn't look at the notes to actually see it's not residential, it's wholesale. So if you can change those so it's corrected, that'd be great, both on the bar graphs and on the chart there. But if you can't, the spreadsheet, but if you can't, change the footnote, but be sure to do it the other way next year, please.
So we can definitely change the footnote. If so, what I was showing on this slide here is the yellow is currently where the Carlton revenue is located in the statement of revenues and expenses, changes in net position, and then the blue is where Lafayette revenues are at. So if you flip to the next page, Trina. So this is the note 12. So potential change would be, we could retitle that. So we could leave it wholesale. We could change it to contract water sales, whatever. If you flip the next page, this is a narrative of kind of what I think you've described, Commissioner Tankersley. We could potentially change this to be called out as a table rather than a narrative format that describes the cubic feet, the revenue generated from those cubic feet sales, as well as the classification of that revenue in the financial statements. We could do a table. That obviously doesn't change the classification. If we're going to change the classification on page 17, that would require general ledger adjustment on our side for both 22-23 and the prior year 21-22, and would change it for those 2 years. And then the audit report would reflect that. Because the audit report, those tables or those the statements that get generated, they're generated from our books, and then of course, audited by the auditors. So that's how those statements would be changed, is we would need to make the changes on our end. Going back for that table on page 9, since that goes back multiple years previous, those wouldn't be reflected in our statements.
We didn't sell to Carlton any appreciable amount except for those 2 years.
Those 2 years,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So
What determined where why Carlton was
why?
classified in one and Lafayette in another?
yeah, so the Lafayette was first, since they were 1.5 times the standard rate. They were set up as a separate rate class. They're the only customer in it.
When that's what we called wholesale.
Yeah, and then when Carlton came along, since they're at 2 times the rate, which is the same as other outside customers, they're classified being a large customer as general service, and just got lumped in general service rural. And so that's how they ended up in general service. So,
but Mark, I don't want our financial statements to be inconsistent with the contract. The contracts say it's wholesale water. We're not selling it as residential water, and I think the financial statement should reflect that.
yeah, okay. So and I don't know, Keith, maybe if you can help with this, but I'm thinking if we were to make this change for both years, we'd need to do it this year, because our classification, our financial statements are comparative, and so we have both years right now, a view of that. If we were waiting till next year, we would be able to change 22-23, but we wouldn't be able to go back to 21-22 to make that change, at least in the comparative financials. Do you have any thoughts on that, Keith?
Yeah, and I know, Mark, you and I got a chance to chat about this a little bit too. I think for, this year, I mean, if the commission is comfortable with it, is kind of making some of these updates to the footnotes, so it's clear where things are recorded, and you have the exact dollar amounts in these paragraphs that tell you how much is related to the wholesale sales to Carlton or to Lafayette as well. So you see those actual dollar amounts. And this would be, a change that we're seeing right here on the footnotes that is pretty quick and easy, and we can kind of move forward with finalizing everything so that you all can kind of get this over to the city for inclusion in their report as well. The other changes that Mark was referring to and making a journal entry on their side, we would do that as well. It would be reflected in the financials. It's a little more involved, take a little more time. That could delay a little bit in terms of when things get finalized, and kind of with the holiday break and vacations and things like that. Could potentially push it out a little bit longer, but we're happy to do either way. I think this gives you enough information with how you're seeing it here that any reader could see that. And the notes, we say it in our report too. I mean, the notes are an integral part of the financial statements. They are definitely part of it. You're not necessarily presenting, it's not like you're missing numbers on your financial statements. It's just a matter of one operating revenue category to another. So it's there, the information is there. I think going forward, moving it makes sense. But Mark, you had mentioned having to do some other things maybe on the CIS side for how those cash receipts are tagged when they come in, or things like that as well. I believe that might take some more time and be good to kind of set those things up before moving forward with shifting these around. Was that accurate?
Yeah, it would require changes in CIS, and I'm not sure if it would require a different rate code, or if we could simply just make the change on the customer account. I believe it's the rate code that drives it. That's where the general ledger account gets connected to. So we might have to create a separate rate code and put Carlton on a different rate code to get that done.
So I have a clarifying question about terminology. You've referred to it as wholesale water and contracted water. Is it the same thing?
Well, it could be, but I think based on what Commissioner Tankersley shared, both of those contracts are wholesale based. So I think wholesale water would maybe be a fair description. So that's probably, and so that previous page where I suggested changing it from wholesale to contract, I think we could just leave that as it is, not change that, leave that as wholesale water sales, but then potentially add this verbiage here. Or you could do something a little more standout, and you could do a separate table that would list out what's in writing there as a part of this note to show the water sale cubic feet, the water sale revenue, and even the water or the revenue classification for both fiscal years. So it would really be kind of jump out and you'd see it. You wouldn't have to maybe read through the paragraph and think about it. It would just pop out.
I think that'd be a good idea.
And it would show it as the total wholesale water for
Yeah.
Right.
those 2 years.
Yeah.
That would be better.
If they're actually on page 26, there's note 3 has a schedule. It's actually for accounts receivable, but it has a schedule or a table that we could kind of adapt something like that would pop it out pretty good. We kind of thought about that right before the meeting, actually, that might work.
Yeah, I
See
think
account night. So
If during the process you want to mention page 17, I think we should also mention page 9. So if somebody's looking at it and they look back, but this graph isn't right either.
okay.
So what are the other reverberations of changing 2 years? Moss Adams mentioned that this could delay turning these financials over to the city. When do they usually go? What's that delay? Are there reverberations there? You mentioned CIS, that they would need to report out to CIS. What else would need to be done, and where else could there be an impact from making that change now instead of later?
Yeah, so CIS, I was actually talking about our customer information system. So it's like our software. Yeah.
Thank you.
We do that too internally. So, but Yeah, so there's a setup change that's needed in our customer system. Potentially if we were to do that, but as far as impact to the city, so when we do the audit committee meeting, after we get the final draft, if there's any edits back, basically what I put in the packet, I provide to the city as a draft, just so they have a view of what our audit looks to be before it's finalized and signed and everything. That way they use that to kind of build out their report. Obviously, they're not finalized numbers until the audit's completed, but still, we give that to them. So what would happen would be we'd make changes. If it's a note change, just in talking with Keith this afternoon, it sounds like we were able to get them that early in the morning tomorrow. Then they can make those changes hopefully either tomorrow or early after Thanksgiving. And then we would need to sign the management letter, representation letter, and that's when the audit would get completed. And we could provide it then finalized to the city. I certainly could give them a heads up as to, if we're not changing the numbers to them, I think that's not a big deal. If we're changing the numbers on the financial statements themselves, that's a bigger deal because that's what's really they're folding in, not so much our notes per se. So I think not a big deal, not a big impact, just a heads up to them if we're making a change to the notes. If we're making a change to the financial statements themselves, that's a bigger deal, and that's gonna require coordination with them, because I don't honestly know what their drop dead date is. I know that they issue their financials before December 31st. I'm on vacation for a couple of weeks after this was planned, so there's some timing things that I would have to work through with the finance director of the city to sort that out. So
generally, I think I would be supportive of the first scenario that you, as long as the notes identify that, and that moving forward, we would have a more formal representation within the budget. I think that makes sense. It's noted so that it becomes part of your work for next year.
Okay.
But I'm speaking just for myself, so I certainly want to hear from
Yeah.
Commissioner Tate?
I was trying to figure out if there's other ramifications from making changes that go back to the 2022 financial statements. Like, does it substantially change any other processes or any other things that come out of getting a final financial statement? Money's gonna move, I guess, but not out of that area, right?
What it would look like if you go back to that first page, Trina. So you're talking about if we were to change the numbers on the financial statements themselves?
Yeah, but I guess it's also kind of falls into the question about also the timber revenues, because that's also something that is requiring an adjustment, correct? And so if we're already doing an adjustment that's going back to 2022, then it seems like this is easier to just fold into that as well, right?
So yeah, if you in the audit, the 2022 numbers in the financial statements say restated on them, and that's because of the adjustment that we made.
Happened before
that happened, right, correct. Yeah.
And so the change for just this water revenue is not as significant because it's really not moving out of that category. It's just different, harder for us to look and see what's residential versus wholesale water at that point.
My only concern is unintended consequences that without input from the finance director at the city, I'm kind of unaware of the reporting there and historic reporting. My only hesitation is approving a change, especially a retroactive change, without first, asking those questions or stating the intent and then making sure there's no reverberations that haven't been considered. And I don't know what I don't know,
Yeah, it's my understanding is just a delay, right? I mean, their audit doesn't the number doesn't change. As Kathy pointed out, the number for the total revenue for water doesn't change.
Right.
The totals don't change.
No, the totals don't change.
It's just in what's. how they-
What would
Detail.
Yeah, what would happen is the numbers that are shown in yellow there would decrease by about 400,000 each of those 2 fiscal years, and the numbers in blue would increase by the same amount. So we just transfer or, reclassify the revenues from general service to wholesale. As far as the impact of the city with the change, I really think it's a timing issue for them when we get them the final report, as opposed to that the numbers changed. I don't think the numbers will be an issue for them. They take our report and it just goes into the audit as we report it. So they just would need that in a manner or a timeline that works for their audit process. Since we've always done it around this time, I've not, I know they really want our numbers. That's why we give them the kind of the final draft before it's completed, just so they have that. I know they're on a pretty tight timeline. So
And that final draft made the timber revenue adjustment on it, right?
it did. Yeah.
I feel strongly that we ought to have this correct, but if I don't want to mess the city up, and if you can make it, let's be crystal clear in the footnote, right? That that's what it is in the total, with the total, because I mean the total wholesale water is what, $1 million instead of 200,000. It's like 5 times.
It would be wholesale would be 400,000 higher each fiscal year.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So plus
so
that's.
the total for the 2 years. I mean, that's $800,000 is real money that we might want to allocate somewhere else. So if you can make it crystal clear, including a separate section about it in the notes, given that we don't want to mess up the city, I can live with that.
And your notes include the chart you discussed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. You bet.
Yeah, so
I think
that
so.
helps,
Part of that, Keith, do you want to chime in on that at all? I don't want to commit. Normally, anytime we're making changes to the report, we're always in communication with the auditors because we want our report to comply with all the standards. So, I'm saying that like, yes, I know we can do that, but I want Keith to confirm.
Yeah, no, we're happy to go either direction, whatever the commission would like.
Okay.
Just as long as you're aware that, changing, reclassing some of these numbers, booking those journal entries might just take a little bit longer and delay things. So just depending on how that impacts the city. From our perspective, I think it would be fine to make those adjustments to the footnotes, leave kind of what you're looking at right here on screen as is for this year. And then going forward next year, we'll be able to make those updates a little bit easier, be able to finalize everything in the normal time frame. And if we leave it like that for this year, we'll be able to kind of finalize everything tomorrow and be done.
Mr. Simovic, could you speak to the impacts at the city? I mean, if you had revised numbers, if your client had these revised numbers come in after everything was closed, what would the implications be for the city?
I can't necessarily speak to how they're going to react to changes in numbers. I don't know. I haven't looked at their financials in a while to see all of what they're bringing in. They may just bringing this in more as higher level numbers. So they might just be bringing in a number for total operating revenues. And so this wouldn't change anything. I don't know if they bring in the detail that shows residential, general service, industrial, so on and so forth. So I'm not sure. I can't say, but I do know sometimes that they may want to be the city may want to kind of finalize things in their normal time frame and may not be as open to kind of delays in that process. It just depends on where things are at. And I'm not, again, since we don't work with the city itself, I'm not sure where they're at in that process or kind of appetite for kind of delaying things a little bit.
And we're not going to have Carlton revenue in next year's audit, right? If that water got cut off, but I'd sure like it to be set up in a way that we
Going
make
forward,
this
right.
mistake again.
Yeah.
moving forward. So if I assume when they're talking to us, they started talking to us and I seem to have brought down about emergency water, so it may come up that way, but I'd like to have something set up so that this doesn't happen.
Yeah. So we certainly can do that. We can set up CIS. I can propose a change that the auditors can look at tomorrow morning. Get that to them tomorrow morning about having a table as opposed to just a narrative format. So it really does kind of pop out that shows total wholesale water that includes both Carlton and Lafayette in the note 12. And then I can even put a statement in that, under that graph on page 9 that just to kind of explain that there's.
So if you did that, I would be satisfied.
Okay. Yep, we can do that.
And again, what kind of delays are we talking about? Because I am not opposed in any way to making these changes or calling it out. I understand the reasoning for it. I simply don't want to create a negative situation for somebody else down the line. And so if city finance can't get this finalized until a few days before it's due or something like that, by incorporating these changes now, that would give me concern. I guess and so I hear that this might delay these financials going to the city for up to a month. That's what I'm kind of deriving from what you're saying, but we haven't really been given a hard number yet.
Yeah,
That's if we do it the other way.
Yeah.
If we do it this way, he does the changes tomorrow morning.
if we make the changes to the note.
Right.
It's just
And not the financial statements, there's no adjustments required, and that's where the timeline change really happens, is if we're doing audit adjustments and adjustments on our general ledger, we have to open both years again, and there's a procedural things that will take quite a bit of time to do that. If we're changing the notes, I can propose updated notes and get that to the auditors early tomorrow, and then if they're able to run that through their review process, and they should be able to publish, hopefully, fairly shortly after that.
So we'll see. This is a good time for me to jump in and suggest a motion. Okay, so I would say the motion should be to accept the 2023 financial audit report from Moss Adams with updates to notes regarding wholesale water on page 44, noting changes on pages 9 and 17, and adding a descriptive table.
No, it's not noting changes to the information shown on 9 and 17, because we're not going to change 9 and 17.
To information, noting changes to information on pages 9 and 17. Okay, and adding a descriptive table.
Yes,
Okay,
So moved.
I second.
The motion from Chair Tankersley and a second from Commissioner Christensen. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
aye.
Opposed, say nay. And motion passes unanimously. Great.
I just want to maybe make one more just comment about the audit process. So there was a staffing change that happened right at the start of the audit. City Jacoby has been on our audit for a couple of years and done the role that Sam took on, and he just kind of jumped in with both feet. And I just wanted to basically shout out to him. I really appreciated that transition. That wasn't easy. He found out the day he got back from his vacation, I guess, and that was when he started our audit in the field. And so he kind of had some big eyes, and we talked a little bit. And that role is pretty critical because, like Keith mentioned, it's one that's a lot of communication with our staff and with Keith. And so he did great in the field, but then there's this whole part where we're drafting the financial statements, and there's emails that go back and forth and a lot of coordination. And it takes a lot of detail to make that pretty smooth. And he just did a wonderful job. So really appreciate his effort, and just wanted to call that out because that was kind of a big surprise for him and for us. And we didn't know how that would go, and it was really smooth. So.
Excellent.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Mark. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll now welcome Jennifer Jolie to present on the 2023 legislative session. Nice to see you.
Thank you. I think Trina has some slides.
Right. Well, John had asked me to come tonight and just kind of give you an overview of what we did in Salem in the 2023 legislative session. And then kind of give a preview of what we expect in the short session. So surprisingly, there was actually a lot that happened, and I did put them in a large slide deck for you, but I don't intend to hit everything on there. But just to give you the comprehensive nature of what happened in the session, it was actually quite surprising, given that there was a walkout, as you may recall, that lasted 6 weeks. And the Senate Republican caucus, many of the members were gone that entire time. And so it really stopped action on the Senate side in terms of bills. Next slide, Trina. So one of the things that the Democrats determined is that they were going to have to roll a bunch of concepts together into packages. And so there were several standalone bills that really got rolled into these two main bills. The House Bill 3630 was more aimed at planning issues, and then 3409 had more programmatic type changes, but they were really focused on community resilience, adaptation, and then reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the building sector. And then of course, there was a lot of state funding. There was a good revenue outlook, surprisingly, towards the end. So it was kind of good, maybe, that it came up at the end because they were able to throw $90 million into the package to help bolster some of these new programs, because there's a lot of new things, as you'll see here, that got kicked off in these packages. Next slide. One of the first major policies, and something that OMEU spent quite a bit of time on during the session, was a proposal for a state energy strategy, which does not exist today other than the policies that are embodied in our statutes and rules. And so the Oregon Department of Energy was given the duty to develop a strategy by November 2025. And basically, they're trying to be developing the best pathways to achieve our policy directives, which in large measure is to get to 100% clean energy by 2040. So that's the goal, is how best to get there. And the bill does require some stakeholder engagement, but it's very, very vague. I mean, the only people named were the state agencies and tribes. So presumably consumer-owned utilities will have a voice in this, and we've heard that's the case, but we'll see how it all rolls out. But there's a lot of risk, of course. It was Renewable Northwest that was the biggest proponent of the bill. So there's, of course, many energy issues that lack consensus, and so we'll be wanting to insert ourselves and making sure that hydro and the issues that we care about have a keen priority in this. Next slide. The bill also contained, this is something that Representative March from the House Committee put in, to have planning grants for energy resilience plans that would go to the counties. This is an optional thing. It started out as a mandate, but it became an optional thing that counties could take advantage of by January 2026. And these would fold into I guess counties have an obligation to do natural hazard mitigation plans. And so if they want to kind of up their game and put in energy resilience plans, they can incorporate that with some state funding. So utilities are supposed to help out with that to the extent that your county may have an interest in this. Next slide. Another component, and these are kind of randomly pieced together, but there's a community navigator position that was created in this bill that has actually been appointed. The woman's name is Sarah Murky is her name, and she's
working in particular with a lot of the rural communities of color. Many of the COUs, particularly some of the smaller ones, are hopefully going to be aided by this role at ODO and really helping with some of the tapping into the federal grants from the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and then the Inflation Reduction Act. So one of the things that was important in this is that it was funded by general fund dollars rather than energy supplier assessments. Many of our board members were concerned about funding the position. So we'll see how that goes going forward. Next slide, please. Another element of the bill had to do with energy efficiency. As you know, or you've likely heard, there's a lot of programs, two new energy efficiency programs from the Inflation Reduction Act that will be bringing a lot of dollars into Oregon. And the idea behind this is that it's confusing to the consumers, and how do we kind of braid all these incentives and so that the customers can take advantage of them all, and that they work together in a coherent and easy way. And that's another duty that ODO has been given in this bill. Next slide. There's currently conversations underway about how this law work. ODO is just now getting kind of information from US DOE about, you know, what their program needs to look like, and they plan to submit an application in 2024 for this. So it's still a ways out, but they are talking to the COUs. They just had a meeting recently with some of the technical folks and looking at, you know, how can we stack incentives with our BPA measures that your rate dollars fund, and making sure that the energy efficiency standards line up. And so they can be used together, and that we don't have the situation where putting the incentives together, you're actually funding more than what the measure costs. And then the big question I would say right now is, you know, what is the role of the COU to, you know, administer these incentives, these new federal dollars? Do you want to take that on? Do you want to be doing income verification? And if not, you know, which third party should be doing this? So there's been a lot of talk about the Energy Trust of Oregon. As you know, they provide services in the investor-owned utility areas. And I think many of our utilities would be concerned about them taking on this role in our service territories. So a lot of things to unfold in the next several months. And so we're pretty engaged in those conversations and making sure that your experts are at the table in that. Next slide. Some of you may be aware that there was an interim task force looking at building performance standards and really trying to get at the issue of emissions from the building sector. We spent time already on the energy sector and transportation with our clean fuels program. And so the kind of the last frontier now is buildings. And so they passed a package of bills. These all were folded into the climate package of several bills relating to trying to address the building sector emissions. Probably the biggest one here is a building performance standard for existing commercial buildings. So buildings over 35,000 square feet are going to have to comply with some new energy performance targets that ODO was going to be developing through a rulemaking process. So that's another assignment that ODO got from this past legislative session. That'll be a big one. I mean, we don't really even know how many buildings fall into that category, which to me was puzzling that the legislature would put something in without really understanding the implication. So I think there's going to be an inventory that needs to take place to determine who falls into this. They did exempt schools which was interesting, but not local governments. And so there's a lot there that I don't think many people recognize how big that that little policy measure is. So
It's all 100% applies to new construction, not remodel.
right, the building performance standard is actually for existing buildings, existing commercial buildings, and then there's another one, the one above that relates to building codes. So the Department of Consumer and Business Services, which has the building codes division, will be developing a new code to achieve a 60% reduction in annual energy consumption for new buildings. So there's components of both existing and new buildings. Yes.
So Jennifer, I think the building energy standards are a great idea, but to make sure I understand, what's going to happen to somebody who has a big old warehouse by in 2028 and you couldn't meet a standard that would apply to a new building? Or I mean, are they going to have to tear it down? Or are they going to just pay a fine every day? Or
well, there's a lot to be hashed out in the rulemaking. I mean, a lot. I mean, that's probably the understatement of the century to say that. And I don't think that a lot of the building owners were paying particular attention to this during the session. It really happened very quickly, and it was rolled into this package at the end. But yeah, there are big implications. There are a lot of exemptions for industrial things like chip manufacturing, which was another thing that was big on their agenda. So there are some exemptions for, sort of favored industries, but they plan to develop targets that are by the type of use. So not all warehouses necessarily are going to be treated the same.
Yeah, because if it's not heated, it would not apply, right?
Right. That's probably a good assumption. It's hard to say how it'll all unfold, but the state of Washington really has launched this whole thing, and they recently adopted a program. They actually came and spoke at our annual meeting, and so John had an opportunity to hear from how they were designing their program. So I think we'll learn a lot about what worked and what didn't in Washington state. So, and then there's also an element that applies to state buildings, and then also establishing a heat pump goal for our state. I think that number is pretty aggressive, but from what I understand from Odo, that we have about 140,000 heat pumps in place today in the state. So it's a big jump.
Yeah.
Okay. Next slide. Actually, you can skip the next two slides. Kind of smaller policy matters. And then they also had an EV component for heavy duty trucks. This was mainly to get the program in place. They only put a $3 million appropriation in it, but I think they're trying to go after some federal funds for this, is my guess. Next slide. This is kind of an issue that always comes up in the legislative session. It's probably a big issue around this area of the state.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's any definitive policies other than the Department of Land Conservation and Development is supposed to conduct a rulemaking. So you'll want to pay attention to that, I guess. Next slide.
There are new solar applications that are being designed for agriculture, specifically kind of in response to this push-pull that's happening on EFU lands. They're pretty cool. They're essentially a pole, and then the solar cell rotates around, but it's not tracking the sun, it's programmed. So if you need shade on your crop or you need full sun on your crop, that it can adjust. So it can be collecting energy and providing some other goods.
Interesting. Well, there'll be a rulemaking if you want to weigh in on that, Mayor.
You have time.
No.
Yeah, it's your spare time. In your spare time.
Relevant.
The Global Warming Commission, which has been around for a while, was renamed in a bill to the Oregon Climate Action Commission, and they added some more members and gave them some new duties. They're going to be developing a forecast of expected GHG emission reductions and recommend some goals for the state based on best available science. Additionally, they are going to be developing carbon sequestration and storage goals by 2025. This was this whole debate came forward as part of the cap and trade discussion a couple of years ago, and really wasn't dealt with in the 100% clean energy bill. So this is kind of coming back, and it did get Republican support for many of the measures, working with the ag, because there are incentives for certain use of rangelands and ag. You can skip 2 slides, Trina. The solar incentive programs were continued in the bill. There's currently a solar plus storage rebate, and that was funded. Another $10 million went into that, which has been a popular program. Next slide. There was also a bill in response to the heat dome event in 2001, and the legislature established this heat pump deployment program that was aimed at apartments and renters. And this bill, or this funding, was continued as part of this bill as well. Next slide. Resilience hubs. This was an idea of Representative Marsh, and there's a $10 million grant program that for planning and organizing around resilience hubs, and to allow for resources and services needed to prepare for and respond to emergencies. And I just checked in with the agency. It's actually the Department of Human Services, and they're going to be developing some rules in the January timeframe, but that may be something that your utility or your city might be interested in taking advantage of. Next slide. In the EV space, there was a bill that passed that said that state agency light duty vehicles after 2025 must be zero emission, unless it's not feasible for whatever their particular use would be. So that's pretty big policy. Initially, as that proposal was introduced, I think last year, it also included local government, but that was amended out. There's a requirement when there's state funds being used for charging systems that they have to be installed using someone who's trained with the EV infrastructure training program certification. I'm not sure if that'll impact you too much if you're getting state dollars for chargers, but it may. And then there's a property tax exemption for community solar, and that was expanded beyond residential. Next slide. In the hydrogen area, you may have heard that recently the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Hub was selected for a $1 billion federal grant under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And so there was some funding put forward for that effort. And then also they passed a bill that defined green electrolytic hydrogen, which speaks to how the hydrogen is produced using hydropower, and that kind of was important for, it was really climate solutions that kind of pushed that measure to ensure that hydropower could be used to develop hydrogen for this hub.
Does that include old hydro, existing hydro?
Large
Yes.
hydro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, something-
Our
something
stuff.
things-
Yes. Our stuff. Yeah, I guess from what I understand, there was a presentation during legislative days about the new hydrogen hub. And there's 2 projects, one in Boardman and one in Baker City, and then the rest are in Washington State. But can be an interesting thing to watch.
Yeah, where are you gonna get the water? Baker City.
Out of the river. That's the grant. isn't it?
Next slide, Trina. This is just to let you know there was a broadband bill. It didn't really do too much other than loosen the statutes a little bit to make it more usable with the new federal funding opportunities. Next slide. The legislature also developed the Oregon Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, which is working on a pipeline for people to work in this area and also to create a little bit of funding for local governments, which they didn't put much money into it, as you can see, but they may in the future, and it could be an opportunity for small, cities and school districts and things. And then these are some public records exemptions and public meeting exemptions that were explicitly adopted to deal with cybersecurity threats and making sure that public bodies like this can address these issues in a private executive session. I think the issue, again, it was a Lane County issue where they were talking about cybersecurity insurance, and vendors were trying to get this information. And so they decided to run a bill, which was passed. Next slide. There was also a bill in the Judiciary Committee that created a crime of domestic terrorism, and it related to critical infrastructure. It's pretty narrowly drawn, and there was some controversy around it with the ACLU, but they did end up passing it. It was narrowed. I think there was a concern about protests and how that might somehow be impeded by the definition that was initially proposed, which was pretty sweeping. But anyways, there's a crime. Next slide. You may recall you have a wildfire utility plan requirement from a bill 2 years ago. There were amendments this session on the wildfire risk map, which is a statewide map of fire hazard zones. They changed it a little bit, so it's going to go from 5 risk zones to 3 hazard zones, and then notification is only going to be going to those folks in the level 3 areas, and they will be subject to rules that the fire marshal will adopt related to home hardening and defensible space, trying to make clear that does not apply to existing dwellings, the roofs, that people don't have to replace their roofs if they're in those zones. The map is actually out right now and kind of being shopped around with the counties. So it should be adopted probably in the next several months. Next slide. You probably are aware they did up the procurement thresholds, which is a good thing because they hadn't been updated for some time. This is a bill that the governor put forward that went through. They're usually hard to pass. Next slide. These are just a snapshot of some of the bills that died. Probably the biggest one is the last bullet there that had to do with data centers, and there's controversy related to, you may have seen a series of articles about the Umatilla Electric data centers in Eastern Oregon and kind of the energy mix for generation for those facilities. And many saw that as a loophole because COUs aren't included in the 100% clean energy because of our hydro profile, but it wasn't really triggered to your actual energy mix. So it's mainly because you are a COU, you got the exemption. And so this is an interest of the environmental community, climate solutions to tighten that up. So we may see legislation in that area. OMEU didn't really take a position on it. I know the PUDs and the co-ops were opposed to the bill. Next slide. Nuclear was an issue. We had a bill to kind of loosen some of the restrictions to make way for the small nuclear reactor, but that didn't go anywhere. There's a lot of concerns on that. Next slide. Next slide. And then these are some of the bills that, again, were important to many in the session that didn't pass. There was an idea to allow for bonuses. The business community really wanted that bill, but it died, as well as school districts. And then I think the mayor probably remembers the project labor agreement. I think the LOC had people lobbying on that, and it died this time. Next slide. Next session it's going to be a real short session, 35 days. So everything pretty much has to be lined up going into session if it has much hope of passage. The focus again, this session is going to be on housing and homelessness, as well as reform of Measure 110. So I anticipate those will be the big issues. But there is a possibility for some state funding for grid hardening projects. That's something that the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act provides some federal funding for, but 60% of that is going to go to the IOUs. And so the idea was to try and make a push for some extra funding to get more projects in COU territories funded, because there is a great need around the state. There is also a bill that will allow counties to charge fees to utilities for county right-of-way access. I think John attended a meeting with me on that. And we've tried to narrow it, but it will have impacts to electric utilities, particularly for underground facilities. So, but we did get some good exemptions for vegetation management and just standard maintenance and replacement of poles. There's also a bill from Senator Taylor to try and advance and require Oregon to participate in a regional transmission organization, which obviously has huge implications. I think the way it's drafted today, it's probably okay because it's not a requirement, but we'll see how that unfolds. And then there is another bill related to the energy facility siting process and making way for battery energy storage.
What's the thought behind the legislature getting involved in the RTO?
I just think that a lot of the renewable advocates are really pushing for more transmission, and I think that's honestly, I think it's renewable lobbying for new transmission. There was a briefing during the legislative days just a couple weeks ago with BPA, PGE, and several others, PUC chair, where I think the complexity of the issue and the kind of the multi-state nature of transmission was highlighted. And so maybe it will prompt them to back off a little bit, but I don't know.
It is.
It is
Oh, very,
confusing.
Very.
It's really not, in my view, it's not really something for state legislatures to necessarily be involved. I mean, they should be aware and,
Right.
and engaged, but,
Should really be the utilities.
the utilities, are the ones that are planning for it and BPA, of course, so. Sorry, this is just kind of a whirlwind presentation of what happened, but a lot happened in a very, very short period of time. And I don't think many people know, including many of the legislators, what all was in there. So it's a very fast session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? All right.
All right, thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
Welcome up, Ms. Phillips, for a presentation on, seeking commission approval of revision number 12 to Exhibit A. Can you please present? Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. So before you is a proposed revision to Exhibit A of the transmission agreement that McMinnville Water and Light has with Bonneville Power Administration. Revision 12 reflects MW&L's request to extend the temporary undesignation of the Priest Rapids and Wanapum resources through September 30th, 2028. During that period, the transmission rights associated with those resources will be transferred to BPA Power Services to manage those projects and resources using the secondary crediting service. Power Services will serve McMinnville's net requirements from the federal system and remarket Priest and Wanapum on our behalf. Staff recommends approval of revision 12 to Exhibit A of the service agreement for network integration transmission service, contract number 02 TX-10856.
This sounds to me like it's pretty much what we're doing now, right?
Yes, yeah, it's an extension
So
in time.
So why do we need an amendment? Because it timed out?
Mhm.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. This extends it through the end of the
Okay.
contract period.
Good. Okay.
Any other questions?
Nope.
We have a resolution number 2023-22, a resolution authorizing and approving revision number 12 to Exhibit A, Table 1 of the Network Integration Transmission Service Agreement, contract number 02 TX-10856, entered into between the City of McMinnville acting by and through its Water and Light Commission and the United States Department of Energy acting by and through the Bonneville Power Administration.
Thank you, Ms. McManus. Will you please poll the commission?
Did we have a motion and a second?
So
No,
So
we
moved.
skipped that part.
Second.
I have a motion from Chair Tankersley and a second from Commissioner Tate. And now will you please poll the council or commission?
Wait,
Yes.
Been a while.
Mayor Jopkin,
Aye.
Commissioner Tankersley,
Aye.
Mr. Christensen,
aye.
Commissioner Tate.
Hi.
And the resolution is adopted unanimously. Thank you. And we'll now welcome Mr. Hudson up to discuss rejecting the lowest bid that came in for non-compliance.
Yes, good evening. So in early 2023, water treatment staff doing their inspections, Haskins Reservoir, and found the sluice gate at the bottom of Haskins Creek, basically a valve, was not operating correctly. So in turn, Water and Light, we actually ordered one ourselves, just received it. But it's in a location that's we cannot repair the repairs. We have to hire a contractor at the very bottom of the reservoir.
You give me a submarine?
Maybe, we'll have to go for a separate solicitation on that.
Okay.
But so we did. This was a competitive formal process due to the projected dollar amount. So we did advertise in DJC, who's registered. Did have a public bid opening. We received 2 bids. After review of the apparent low bidder, Lawrence Brunn, it was found that they did not include 2 of the required documents. The non-collusion affidavit and the affidavit of contractor and subcontractor prevailing wages. Explicitly stated in our bid documents that those were a requirement to be submitted at the time of bid submission, and they were excluded. So in turn, staff is recommending by resolution that their bid was rejected for non-compliance, and that the award is made to the low responsible bidder, which is Stellar J Corporation, in the amount of $277,500, pending an issuance of a notice of intent to award and no protest being received.
Any questions?
Yeah, I have one quick
Fair.
one. So what happened here? Do they not know what they're doing? The low bidder?
I really don't know.
Have-
I mean, it's clearly spelled
I
out.
mean, have they done this kind of work before?
The low bidder,
Yeah,
yeah, they've been around for quite some time.
I mean, first of all, it appears obvious to me that there's no collusion here since they were $100,000
Yeah.
less. So, but you think they didn't know they had to pay prevailing wage?
I think they did. It's just it was a document affidavit that we require in these formal solicitations that they excluded from their bid submission.
Likely an oversight.
In our
Yeah.
contract says they have to do that, right? They have to pay prevailing wage.
Correct. That's a standard, yeah, contractual clause.
So. Probably a Sam question.
I love Sam questions.
If it's clear to all of us from the fact they're, $100,000 less than the other bidder, that they didn't collude. And the contract that we prepared for them to use requires them to pay prevailing wage. Can we waive these irregularities and save $100,000?
Well, I think if they're material, if we require them, we explicitly require these documents in the, to submit. And so they are out of compliance with our bids.
And so we're required to.
Yeah,
reject
I mean, by rule, we're required.
Okay.
Or go out for a
We can
rebid.
reject, we can
Say it's a
reject all.
failed
Then I
process.
think I heard and read in that memo that we need to get this done
It is
now.
very time sensitive.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, I mean, I know what Mr. Hudson said about that, but I mean, we add both of these memos for reasons. We add them so collusion, so the bidders know that they
Right,
collude, and prevailing wage. We want them to double down on, you are gonna pay prevailing wage. We
Right.
don't want problems with this. And so it's why we go down hard on it, because we want to make sure that our contractors know this is a prevailing wage contract, and we don't want any false expectation or them to be misinformed, or even if it's sloppy bid work, that they know that their estimator knows this is a prevailing wage job.
Perhaps that was $100,000 less without prevailing wage.
I don't know. But it is.
Yeah, there was a differential.
But I think that's Mr. Hudson and I talked about why the history of this affidavit. It may be because in the past we've been burned on that. I don't know.
And isn't there some kind of, they bond, don't we make them bond to pay prevailing wage, and then if they don't do that, they don't bond it and they don't get paid, don't we have to pay it if they can't collect it from them or something like that?
The bond's $30,000, I think.
For the bond.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
I think if we don't comply with prevailing wages, we will be liable for it. That's right.
And where was the wow in the two bids? I mean, was it subtle throughout, like, a little less here, a little more here, or were there some remarkable areas where it was
It was a lump sum bid.
a lump sum bid?
There's an urgency to this project.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, I think I would recommend that we read the resolution. My feeling is it was the proposer's issue that they didn't comply with the required documentation. I don't think that needs any further discussion. I mean, that's pretty clear when you have a requirement, that's a completeness check. They didn't complete, they didn't pass that, so they couldn't move forward. Yeah, that makes sense. It's unfortunate that we have to pay more, but Wouldn't want to dilly-dally on a decision like this.
Any other discussion? Questions? No, not hearing any. I would entertain a motion to, oh, would you like to read this
Sure.
resolution? Thank
It's
you.
resolution number 2023-23, a resolution by the City of McMinnville Municipal Corporation of the State of Oregon acting by and through its Water and Light Commission awarding contract for the Haskins Reservoir Sluice Gate Replacement ITB number 2023-0136 to Stellar J Corporation.
And do I hear a motion?
I know.
And a second?
Second.
I have a motion from Commissioner Christensen, a second from Commissioner Kate. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed say nay. And the resolution passes unanimously.
So I would just add one more thing to this.
After the vote?
No,
That
not.
seems rough.
Do we
Not-
take a roll call?
Oh, we take a roll. I'm
I
sorry,
see-
we do
I
it.
see Trina like,
Yes, I apologize. You know, we do it, the methodology, we do it differently at council than commission. And of course, I do that routine much more frequently. So I apologize.
still a long meeting.
It's okay. It's better to keep me on my toes. Gina, would you please poll the commission?
Yes, Mayor Dropkin,
Aye.
Commissioner Tankersley,
Aye.
Commissioner Christensen,
Aye.
Commissioner Tate.
Aye.
And the resolution is adopted unanimously.
But that wasn't my comment. Since this is a critical piece of equipment, I've directed staff to order a spare gate, so we have one in inventory if we do have an issue like this in the future. Because the last time this was replaced was 21.
Oh,
Oh, wow.
oh, wow. So we need to have a backup.
And this also happens to fit our 2 diversion points too, so it would spare 3 things in our system.
We
Wow.
buy a better one that lasts longer.
Yeah.
Give it the installation cost.
Well, yeah, if we probably would have had a spare gate here, I think the cost would have been quite a bit less because we could have done it, you know, under an emergency at that point. Because, you know, it does, basically, if we don't have it, the reservoir's empty.
Right. So when you say we could have done it under emergency, we've gone out and done a procurement that way
Yeah, I think we could have
and
done.
negotiated a price.
Yeah,
We
Feels like
can't
an
do that.
emergency, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, now that we have one in stock.
yes,
And we can immediately go install if we had a contractor available, it would change the dynamic, but since we didn't have one in stock, there was time enough to go obtain a contractor.
I would have liked to have this information before. Because we could reject the bids and go do that, right? Or is that a self-created emergency?
Yeah, I think that's not.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have enough time to plan now. Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
I don't like spending.
I know, I agree.
Mr. Woodward, you would join us, I'm assuming electronically, to present the next resolution.
Yeah, so the man on screen here. Thank you. At the August meeting, a couple months back, we requested and for the commission to approve start the application process with the Bureau of Land Management to allow the trenching and burial of a coaxial cable to run from our equipment bunker at High Heaven to the county bunker to get the elevation we need for our antenna. Let me get this. So today I'm gonna pull that up here. Today I'm requesting the amendment of the BLM lease agreement, specifically this exhibit 1B section 1.4. And for here to add the highlighted line here for just amend the lease to add this particular paragraph. This will allow us to be able to proceed with the trenching. And the trenching will be this section right here.
And Dad, we have something on a tower now that we're gonna move to a different tower.
No, we have nothing located at that particular tower right now.
Okay, great.
No, don't we have our existing tower there, don't we?
We have equipment on our own tower, but we are not moving equipment from our tower to theirs. We're adding an antenna to theirs.
Oh,
Okay.
So we keep our tower and then add to theirs. Okay, thank you.
Correct.
Any additional questions? Please read the resolution.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Resolution number 2023-24, a resolution by the city of McMinnville and Municipal Corporation, State of Oregon, acting by and through its Water and Light Commission, authorizing approving a communication use lease amendment 1 between Water and Light and the United States of America, Department of Interior to Bureau of Land Management.
Trina, would you please poll the commission?
So moved.
Oh.
He moves, I second.
I have a motion from Chair Tankersley, a second from Commissioner Christensen, and will you please poll the commission?
We're all a team here.
Oh, man, it's a rough one.
Mayor Drabkin,
Aye.
Commissioner Tankersley,
Aye.
Commissioner Christensen,
Aye.
Commissioner Tate.
Aye.
The resolution is adopted unanimously. Thank you very much. I think at this point, we have a joint presentation from Mr. Sticka, Mr. Burke, and Mr. Justice regarding PFAS.
All right, we're here to talk about two class action lawsuits regarding PFAS. Earlier tonight, Commission had an opportunity to meet with General Counsel during executive session to discuss the two class action lawsuits. I'm going to take a few minutes just to talk about PFAS, what they are, and how it affects McMinnville water and light water system. Excuse me. So PFAS has been around since 1940s. They're spread across a large variety of consumers, commercial, industrial products. There's thousands of different types of PFAS. These chemicals are found in non-stick cookware, waterproofing clothing, firefighting foams, among other products. EPA first was alerted about the hazards of PFAS in the late 1990s. In 2013 and 14, EPA required water suppliers serving populations over 10,000 to test for 6 PFAS through the Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule 3. We call it UCMR3. McMinnville Water and Light performed quarterly samples during this time period. All those samples from the Haskins and Succo watershed came back as non-detects. Again, in 2021, we tested these for PFAS voluntarily. During this time period, we tested both the Haskins and Nestucca watershed and our future water source, the Willamette River. Both of those sources came back as non-detects for PFAS as well. So today, we haven't detected any PFAS in our drinking water. Moving forward, we're going to be testing both the Haskins and Nestucca watershed and the Willamette River for PFAS this month, next week, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, and then in 2025, McMinnville Water and Light will be required through the UMCR5 to test for 29 PFAS and for lithium. So we're going to additionally update our website. So you'll see something on our new website coming up with a PFAS page. This will help answer any questions for our customers out there. Some utilities already have those up. It'll be very similar to what other utilities have, and kind of direct them to the EPA websites. Also, I wanted to note that for our testing, not just for PFAS, but for all of our testing, you can look at the Consumer Conference Report, which is posted every year. That has all of our results in it as well, for PFAS and for all of our other tests that we perform. So before I hand it over to Mr. Justice for questions in regards to the two class action lawsuits, does the commission have any questions for Ryan or myself?
Thank you.
Okay.
Madam Mayor and Commissioners, so we were in executive session. We discussed this. You heard my recommendation related to this matter. And there are deadlines approaching to opt out of each of the settlements. The DuPont case opt-out deadline is December 4th of 2023, and the 3M case opt-out deadline is December 11th, 2023. I can tell, as we discussed in executive session, my recommendation is to opt out in both cases, and I would just, I don't know if you have any additional questions you want to speak about in the open session.
Any discussion anybody would like to have?
So with regard the 3M case, this is resolution number 2023-25, a resolution of the City of Bentonville Water and Light Commission opting out of the settlement in regarding aqueous film forming foams products liability litigation relating to the City of Camden versus 3M Company. That's 2023-25.
Have a motion?
So moved.
I'll second.
The motion from Commissioner Chair Tankersley and a second from Commissioner Christensen, and the clerk, please poll the commission.
Yes, Mayor Dropkin,
Aye.
Commissioner Tankersley,
Aye.
Commissioner Christensen,
Aye.
Commissioner Tate.
Aye.
Resolution is adopted unanimously.
And I have a second resolution. This relates to the DuPont case. This is resolution number 2023-26, a resolution of the McMinnville Water and Light Commission opting out of the settlement in regarding aqueous film foaming foams products liability litigation related to the City of Camden versus EI DuPont de Nemours and Company et al.
Thank you. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I have a motion from Commissioner Tate
Second.
and a second from Chair Tankersley. Will the clerk, please poll the commission.
Yes, Mayor Dropkin,
Aye.
Commissioner Tankersley,
Aye.
Commissioner Christensen,
Aye.
Commissioner Tate.
And the resolution is adopted unanimously. Thank you very much. Now we will turn this back over to our general manager, Mr. Dietz. And I think first to add some clarity, and then before we move towards an action item, I'm going to make some a kind of important corrective clarification to how this was presented and what we're really voting on. Thank you.
So maybe the background first. So Water and Light's been a NWPPA member, Northwest Public Power Association, for many, many years. And they provide training for electrical utility, employees, commissioners, elected officials, and then they also do quite a bit of advocating for Northwest regional issues. So Chair Tankersley currently serves on the board. And if I remember right, filling the completed term of former Mayor Hill, which expires at the end of this year.
Yes.
And so
expires actually next annual meeting, so it'll be in June.
June, okay. So in June. So we don't actually have a vote in that as far as, the commission. What we're really looking for is the commission direction on allowing Commissioner or Chair Tankersley to serve on that board. The way the structure is set up is different regions within NWP's PPA service territory has different members. So for example, Oregon has a member, and then they usually look at members from different utility types. So it would be municipal, co-op, and PUDs would be members that would serve on that board. And so it's usually they look for those particular utilities that have members that are willing to serve, and then they will appoint if that utility body agrees to have that member serve on the board.
And they also mix between staff and
correct
policymakers. And NWPPA has a nominating committee, and at the last board meeting, they indicated that they were going to recommend to the board, because the trustees are elected at the annual meeting by the members. But they were going to recommend to the nominating committee that they renominate everybody who isn't slated out. So I want to make sure that the commission's comfortable with spending the money and there's no charge except for I had expenses for 3 meetings actually here.
And
And-
the clarity at the end is, it says staff recommendation is to appoint a member of the commission, when in fact it is not the commission that gets to choose who a representative would be, but NWPPA chooses
Right.
who they would like to serve from different bodies.
Yeah, so just tell me whether it's okay for me to tell them that I could stand for reelection.
So,
So is there action for us, or we're just?
yeah,
Head nodding.
I could suggest that a motion to approve and authorize Chair Tankersley service on the NWPPA board if nominated for reelection.
So moved.
I have a motion from Commissioner
second.
Tate, a second from Commissioner Christensen. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Right, and the motion passes unanimously. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your service.
Yes.
It's actually interesting. And hopefully I bring back interesting.
I'm sure you will.
Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful. And Mr. Dietz, any general manager comments?
The only one I have is we're coming up again to the time where we're planning for the annual PPA rally, legislative rally in Washington, DC. And I wanted to make sure that the commission was okay with sending staff and one or more commissioners. Previously, I have gone and the mayor, but it would be open to any commissioner, actually. There are others that want to attend, but I just want to make sure that the commission is still comfortable with us attending that.
So I heard that the mayor was quite effective. And I've also heard from Scott Hill that they like to have an elected official as part of the delegation. And that makes a lot of sense to me, so. And John, you're obviously very knowledgeable, so I would move that we authorize you and the mayor, if you're willing to go to the legislative rally.
Okay.
Would you like that formally?
Well, it was a motion.
It was a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a.
Dueling seconds.
I have a motion from Chair Tankersley, second from Commissioner Christensen. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed say nay. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Any commissioner comments?
I could give an acceptance speech, but I mean.
I would just really quickly, as it relates to kind of the day-to-day here at McMinnville Water and Light, that at the city, we are continuing to pursue reform on ballot measure 110. Our chief of police is serving as the president of the Oregon Association of Chiefs of Police, and we have partnered with League of Oregon Cities, the Oregon Sheriff's Association, and others to push forward recommendations about how that reform would take place and what the effect that we want to see come out of that. There are multiple ways that the state could change that bill or could change that ballot measure, and that how that change happens would affect our enforcement. So on the city side, we are doing the preliminary steps that we can do without knowing how it might be changed. And as example, if they went back to if that open use was again illegal and the state directed that to be through circuit court, we would need to work with the county and make sure that they were prepared and willing to restart that program. If they were to restore home rule, which I don't think is really on the table, but is out there, and the city were to pursue that, well, that would mean standing up an entire drug program in our municipal court, which has never existed before. So there are there's a lot of preparedness to do regardless of how changes flow out from the state, but we're very much at the table, and including that because we have so many weekly written reports. We have our weekly written reports that come from our chief of police or come through our chief of police, there's regularly information in there that then I'm able to forward on to League of Oregon Cities and the others that are out there and lobbying for some of those changes more actively. So if you're reading those reports as they relate to your more immediate concerns, just know that also information that's in there is also it's continuing to have an impact and to move through. So that is my update. Any other commissioners have updates? Okay. Everybody's had an opportunity to see the financials. Any questions? No questions. Okay, and at this time, we are going to go into executive session. Will you read us into executive session? And the meeting will be over when we come out of executive session.
So we're going to executive session on 3 matters. The first being pursuant to RS 192-660 sub 2 sub F to consider information and records that are exempt from public disclosure under RS 192-345-22 relating to records or information if disclosed and allow persons to identify areas of structural or operational vulnerability that would permit unlawful disruption to or interference with services. And RS 192-345-23 records or information that would reveal or identify security measures, weaknesses, or potential weaknesses in security measures taken or recommended to protect individuals and buildings. Following that, we'll go into a session pursuant to RS 192-662F to consider information records exempt from public disclosure under 192-345-23 relating to information revealing security measures and protect information processing in 192-662P to consider matters relating to cybersecurity infrastructure and responses to cybersecurity threats. Then also finally, pursuant to 192, a third session, pursuant to 192-660 sub 2 sub E to conduct deliberations with persons designated to negotiate real property transactions. We will not be coming back into an open session to take any actions. And I don't think we have any media with us, but if there were any media with us, they'd be directed to not sharing information that are part of these executive sessions. So we're going to start with the first one relating to structural and operational vulnerability.